The first time, Chloe pressed my hand to her forehead and said she thought she might have a fever. I was standing in our kitchen at 11 on a Tuesday night, holding cold coffee and approximately zero prepared reasons for why I didn't move my hand for the better part of 30 seconds. "Well," she said, "you're a little warm." I said it the way I say most things at work, flat, measured, like I was documenting it in a chart. "Is that bad?" "It's not nothing." She tilted her head, still holding my wrist in place. "Should I be worried? I have worked in the emergency department at Vancouver General for 5 years. I have talked down panicking parents, kept a man calm through a dislocated shoulder by narrating the Canucks game score, because it was the only thing he wanted to hear. I know what a mild temperature feels like, and it feels like, drink water, take Tylenol, get some sleep. It does not feel like needing to stay very still so you don't do anything you can't explain later." "Drink some water," I said. "You'll be fine." She let go of my wrist. I took my coffee to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the wall for longer than I care to admit. Chloe had moved into my second bedroom 7 months earlier, after my previous roommate went back to Calgary to care for her mother. The apartment, a 2-bedroom in Mount Pleasant that I'd somehow held on to since before rents in Vancouver achieved the altitude of a small religion, was too expensive to carry alone on a nurse's salary. I posted on Facebook Marketplace. Most responses asked about pet policies or short-term leases. Chloe's message was 3 sentences. "Is the kitchen functional? I work from home and I cook a lot. I'm quiet but not in a suspicious way." I told her the kitchen was fully functional. I did not mention that my previous roommate had used the pasta pot to store craft supplies for the better part of 4 months. She moved in the first Saturday of March with 2 boxes of cooking equipment, a floor lamp she'd carried on the SkyTrain, and a very firm opinion about dishwasher loading that she politely waited until week 3 to share. Living with her was, from the beginning, the kind of easy that takes you by surprise. Chloe was a food stylist, the person who makes ingredients look the way they do in cookbooks and grocery flyers before the photographer ever touches the camera. She worked from home most days, testing recipes, adjusting compositions, occasionally photographing arrangements on a foam board, propped against the living room window when the afternoon light came through right. The apartment smelled like cardamom and brown butter and whatever she'd been developing that week. She left small containers in the fridge with handwritten labels. "Try before Thursday? Too much tahini?" I always tried. The tahini was never too much. I worked rotating 12-hour shifts, days, nights, whatever the schedule required, and came home either wired on that particular electrical tiredness that follows a hard shift or quiet in the specific way that needed about 20 minutes of nobody asking me anything before I felt like a person again. She understood the difference before I told her. She could read which one I was from the way I set my keys on the hook by the door. I don't know how. Some nights there was soup on the stove and she'd already gone to bed. Some nights she was on the couch with something on TV, and she'd just glance over and say, "Rough one?" And when I said yes, she'd shift the blanket to make room. We were friends. Good friends. The kind of good that makes you careless about how much of yourself you've let occupy someone else's life. The fever night was in October. I'd been home from a 12-hour shift for about an hour and hadn't yet decided whether eating or sleeping was more urgent. Chloe came into the kitchen in an oversized UBC sweatshirt. She'd told me once she'd never actually attended. She'd found it at a Value Village and said she felt off. "Define off," I said. "Warm, my ears feel strange." "Strange how?" "Like everything is slightly further away than it should be." I looked at her. There's a particular look you develop in emergency nursing, not clinical detachment exactly, but a kind of assessment that doesn't telegraph itself. She wasn't flushed or pale. She looked tired in a way that went beyond a bad sleep. Without thinking about it very carefully, I reached across the counter and put the back of my hand to her forehead. Then she reached up and pressed my palm flat. Her hand over mine, holding it there. Such a small thing, but the kitchen air shifted in some specific way I couldn't name, the way it does right before a storm front comes in, off the Pacific, and the whole city holds itself differently. "Well," she said. "You're a little warm," I said, carefully. like I was only what I was supposed to be. We stood like that, my hand on her forehead, her hand over mine, for longer than any clinical assessment requires. "Drink some water," I said. "Get some sleep. You'll be fine." She let go. I went to my room. I went back and forth on whether it was anything at all. This is the particular cruelty of developing feelings for someone you live with. You can't get any distance from the question. Every morning, there is evidence on the counter. Chloe knew I drank my coffee black, and that I needed one full cup before I was capable of anything more complex than acknowledging someone else existed in the room. She started having mine ready before I woke up on my days off. I noticed. I didn't say anything about noticing, because noticing felt like stepping through a door I wasn't sure I was allowed to open. I had been not noticing things about Chloe for approximately 6 of the 7 months she'd lived with me. I had not noticed the way she hummed when she was concentrating, low, no melody, only when she was deep in something. The way she laughed half a second after everyone else, like she ran things through a second check before committing. The fact that she'd moved my coffee mug to a lower shelf without saying anything, because she'd once watched me knock it reaching over it, and she'd quietly fixed the problem. The way she said our kitchen, our building, that sound our radiator makes, and how unreasonably much I liked that she did. 6 months of not noticing, with increasing unsuccessful results. In November, I was on the phone with Drew, a friend from when we'd worked together at a clinic in the East End before I transferred. He asked how the roommate situation was going. I said fine. He said I'd mentioned her a lot in our last few calls. I said I hadn't. He said okay, and then listed the tahini comment, the mug story, the sticky note she'd left me, once that said you looked like you needed dinner beside a container of soup, the floor lamp on the SkyTrain. I had no memory of mentioning any of it. Apparently, I had mentioned all of it. "You like her," Drew said. "She's a good roommate." "Sure. What's she doing for Christmas?" I didn't answer. He told me to deal with my situation. I told him the situation was fine. The situation was not fine. The thing about falling for someone you live with is there's no clean edge to it. It isn't one moment. It's the slow accumulation of 200 ordinary things until you're standing in the Canby Street Safeway, reaching for the exact brand of rice crackers she mentioned she was out of, and you realize you haven't thought about yourself once in the past 10 minutes. You've been thinking about what she'd want. I put the crackers back. Then I picked them up again. I paid for them. I stood in the November rain outside the entrance for about 90 seconds, genuinely questioning myself. I brought the crackers home. She was at the kitchen table, testing a composition of winter squash for a client, foam board propped against the window. "I got those crackers you mentioned," I said. She looked up. Something moved across her face, quick, not quite a smile. "You didn't have to do that," she said. I was already there. "Thank you, Adrian." I put my jacket away and didn't think about the way she'd said my name. December came the way it does in Vancouver, not with snow, but with a gray density that settles over the city and makes the mountains disappear for weeks. Chloe baked more in December. The apartment smelled like clementines and cloves, and the particular warmth of someone feeding you without calling it that. We watched hockey. She'd grown up watching it with her dad and knew more about the game than I did, which she deployed with precision to win every argument about bad calls. We disagreed about whether the Canucks had actually turned a corner this season or were having a statistically improbable run. She was right. I maintained my position anyway. One evening I came home from a night shift to find a courier package on the kitchen table. She was in her bedroom with the door cracked on a call. I put my keys down and went to make coffee and tried not to listen. I heard Montreal, 6 months, February. I stood at the coffee maker for longer than it takes to make coffee. When she came out, I was reading something on my phone that I wasn't actually reading. "Hey," she said. Her voice was calibrated, not quite normal. "Hey, good call?" A pause, work thing. "Montreal?" She looked at me. She set her phone face down on the counter. "You caught that." Just the one word. She pulled out a chair and sat. I put coffee in front of her and sat across the table. The late-night kitchen was territory we'd established over months, and this part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way she was looking at the mug instead of at me. A magazine wants me for a 6-month editorial contract, she said. Food team, good rates. It would start in February. That sounds like a strong opportunity. The words came out like I was reading them off something. It is. She wrapped both hands around the mug. I haven't accepted yet. But you will. She looked up. I don't know. I wanted to ask how long she'd known. I wanted to ask why she hadn't said anything. I had no particular right to either question. You should take it, I said, if it's what you want. Adrian. She said my name like it had more weight than usual. Can I tell you something? Yeah. She looked at the mug. I applied in September. September. That was 2 months after she'd moved in, before the mug on the lower shelf, before the crackers, before the fever, night. Before I had mapped the sound of her concentration humming, and which floorboard she stepped over on her way to the kitchen, before I was awake. I applied because I thought I needed an exit option, she said. I thought, if I couldn't make myself stop. She stopped. Stop what? She set the mug down. Feeling like this, she said, about you. The kitchen was completely quiet. How long? I asked. Since June, maybe. She shook her head. That's not true. Since the night you stayed up until 1 in the morning trying to figure out why my floor lamp was flickering, and you looked up the voltage rating for the specific bulb because you cared about solving it properly. I thought, that's the kind of person I will absolutely fall for if I am not extremely careful. And then I was not extremely careful. You were going to leave, I said. I was going to have the option to leave. She met my eyes. There's a difference. Is there? I think so. A small sound, almost a laugh. You went on 2 dates since September, I thought. If you meet someone, I need to be able to go. I can't watch that from 20 feet down the hall. She was right about the dates. Correct in her count. Both had ended before I'd wanted them to, though not for the reason I'd been telling myself. Those dates ended early, I said. I know, I heard you come home. What did you think when I did? She looked at the table. I thought, good. I let out a breath. That's not very charitable. No, she agreed, it really isn't. I reached across the table and touched her hand. She went still. Chloe. She looked up. I bought you crackers, I said. She stared at me. The exact brand. I stood in the rain sounds outside the Safeway for a minute and a half because I realized I hadn't thought about myself once in the last 10 minutes. I'd been thinking about what you'd want. I don't do that. I haven't done that in a long time. I stopped. You're not an exit strategy situation for me. You're the thing I've been trying not to act on since August. She exhaled slowly, her fingers turned under mine. August, she said. What happened in August? You left a note that said, I looked like I needed dinner. She closed her eyes. That was just soup. I know, I said. That's when I understood it was a problem. She opened her eyes. In the gray-blue December light coming through our kitchen window. The one where, if you knew exactly where to look, you could almost see the mountains. She looked at me the way you look at something you've been trying not to want too much. I haven't accepted the contract, she said. Don't decide based on me. If you want Montreal, you should go. And if I don't want Montreal? Then I'd like to take you to dinner, outside this apartment, a real one, with shoes. That sounds formal. Saturday. There's a place on Commercial Drive with a tasting menu I've been meaning to try for a year. You saved it for the right occasion. I'm efficient, I said, and apparently very patient. She laughed. That half-second delayed laugh of hers, the one that means something past the second check, and the sound of it did something to my chest that I decided I was done pretending not to notice. We went on Saturday. She wore a dark green jacket I'd never seen and small silver earrings and stood in the hallway, looking like someone I should have been paying closer attention to all along. I had been paying close attention all along, it turned out. I'd just been routing it somewhere useless. The restaurant was warm and dim. We talked about things we'd somehow missed in 8 months of shared breakfasts. Where she'd grown up, Burnaby until 12, then her family moved to Victoria, then she came back for school and stayed. Why food styling? Her aunt had worked in it, and at 15 she'd visited a set and watched someone make a plate of fruit look like it was lit from inside, and nothing else had made as much sense after that. I told her about nursing, about my father's stroke when I was 22, about watching the ward nurses rebuild his daily life piece by piece, teach him to hold a fork again, to recognize faces, to say his own name, and that after that, nothing else had made as much sense either. She listened the way she does, completely still, no phone, like I was the only channel on. Over a pear tart, I asked, "Do you still want Montreal?" She turned her fork over once. "I want what's here," she said, but I needed to know it was a choice. "It's a choice," I said, every time. She looked at me for a moment. "Every day?" "Every day," I said, starting with the crackers. The real smile, not the almost smile, the real one that changes her whole face, arrived and stayed. We walked home in the rain because it was December in Vancouver, and the rain is non-negotiable. She tucked her hand into the crook of my arm somewhere around the second block and left it there. I didn't comment on it. Some things don't need narrating. At our door, she turned and looked up at me, and I understood she was waiting to see if I'd hesitate. I didn't. I kissed her in the doorway while the rain came down on Kingsway, and the building's old radiator kicked on somewhere inside. We didn't rush what came after. We moved carefully and honestly, the way you do when you understand exactly what you're risking and have decided the risk is the point. She declined the Montreal contract the following Monday, took a different editorial project in Vancouver she'd been sitting on. She told the Montreal contact she'd be glad to be considered for something in a year or two. I told her she should go if she ever wanted to. She said she knew. In March, 1 year after she'd carried that floor lamp on the SkyTrain and told me her primary concern was whether the kitchen was functional. We went to Granville Island on a Sunday afternoon, one of those pale early spring days when Vancouver decides to stop being difficult and lets the mountains back into view. We had coffee from the market and walked the seawall and argued about whether sea otters counted as aquatic or semi-aquatic, a game with rules only we understood that we'd been playing for months. On the walk back, the sun dropped behind the North Shore Mountains and the coastal cold came in off the inlet the way it does. Straight through whatever you're wearing, not interested in your jacket's opinion. Chloe put both hands around mine and held them between her palms. "Cold?" I asked. She looked up at me and something in her expression shifted. Careful, deliberate. "A little warm, actually," she said. I stopped walking. She raised an eyebrow, waiting. The seawall stretched empty in both directions in the pale March light. "Should I check?" I asked. "You probably should," she said very seriously, professionally. I raised my hand and pressed it to her forehead. She tilted her head slightly, the same way she had in our kitchen in October, and waited. I covered her hand with mine and held it there. "Well?" she said. I looked at her in the light over Burrard Inlet, with the mountains finally visible behind her, and the coffee cooling in my other hand, and all the ordinary evidence of the past year arranged somewhere behind us. The mug on the lower shelf, the sticky note, the crackers, the rain walk, the pear tart, the 200 small things that had added up, without my permission, into something I had no interest in calculating away. "You'll be fine," I said. She smiled. "I know."